17. The year 1967. Christmas festivities are just beginning, holiday plans are being made, and Parliament is finishing up for another holiday break. This would see the then Prime Minister, Harold Holt, also leaving to begin the end-of-year breakup and holiday period. Australia's 17th Prime Minister, Mr Holt, set off in his maroon Pontiac, navigating a tarmac road bound by moona trees to the entrance of Cheviot Beach. Named after the SS Cheviot, which had broken apart some 80 years prior, killing 35 people, the remote stretch of coastline was in many ways a portent of tragedy. But Holt, a keen swimmer and spearfisher who would reportedly practice holding his breath during Parliament so he could dive deeper during his frequent snorkelling trips, knew the area like the back of his hand. After finalising his last cabinet meeting for the year just days prior, it was a fitting way for the famously private politician to unwind. But before we delve into the strange disappearance of our 17th Prime Minister, if you enjoy real crime, strange occurrences, missing persons cases, disasters, and a little of the paranormal thrown in for good measure, then you found just the right channel for you, because that's mainly all that I do here. So if that all sounds good to you, please do me the favour of abducting the like button, stealing the subscribe button, and making your friends one of us by sharing. Also, feel free to drop a comment or two about today's case, or make suggestions about cases or stories you might like me to cover on the channel in a future video. It is truly subscribers just like you who help creators just like me grow my channel here on YouTube and continue making content for you guys just like this. With that out of the way, let's begin. Harold Holt was born in Sydney in 1905 on the 5th of August in his parents' home in Stanmore. Stanmore is a suburb of Sydney, and he was the first of two sons born to Olive May Williams and Thomas James Holt. His younger brother Clifford was born in 1910. His parents had married 7 months before his birth in January of 1908. On his father's side, Holt was descended from James Holt, a cobbler from Birmingham, England, who arrived in New South Wales in 1829. His paternal grandfather, Thomas Holt Sr., owned a large farming property in Nubber and was twice elected mayor of nearby Wallenbean. Holt's father trained as a schoolteacher in Sydney, and when Harold was born, worked as a physical education teacher at the Cleveland Street School in Surrey Hills. Holt's mother was born in Oodendunda, South Australia, and had Cornish, English, German, and Irish ancestry. Her sister was the actress Vera Pearce. In 1914, Holt's parents moved to Adelaide, where his father would then become the licensee of a hotel in Payneham. He and his brother stayed behind in Sydney, living with an uncle and attending Randwick Public School. In late 1916, Holt was sent to live with grandparents in the country, where he briefly attended the Nubber State School. He returned to Sydney the following year and for 3 years was enrolled at Abbott's Home College, a private school in Killara. And this was around about the time his parents would separate. In 1920, Holt began boarding at Wesley College in Melbourne. He was a popular and talented student, winning a scholarship in his final year and graduating second in his class. Holt generally spent school holidays with relatives in Nubber or with schoolmates rather than with his parents. His father had begun working as a talent agent, touring the country on the Tivoli circuit. And if all of you young folk like me, and I actually really only know about the Tivoli because we have a beautiful neighbour who lives near my mother, actually used to be a Tivoli dancer. And what the Tivoli was, it was a dance troupe. I think they were primarily based in Sydney, but they would travel Australia as well, and they did ballet and jazz and all that kind of stuff. So if you're wondering what the Tivoli dances were, that's what they were, and you can look them up on Google or YouTube. There is bound to be something about the beautiful Tivoli dances online somewhere, but that's what the Tivoli was. So his father was away working on the Tivoli circuit when his mother died in 1925. He was 16 at the time and was unable to attend the funeral. In 1927, Holt began studying law at the University of Melbourne, living at Queen's College on a scholarship. He represented the university in cricket and football and was also active in various student organisations, serving as president of the Law Students' Society of the Queen's College Social Club. That was a mouthful. Holt won prizes for oratory and essay writing, and he was a member of the inter-university debating team. He graduated with a Bachelor of Laws degree in 1930. Holt's father, living in London, invited him to continue his studies in England, but he declined the offer. Before entering politics, he practiced law and was a lobbyist for cinema operators. He was first elected to the House of Representatives at the age of 27, becoming a Member of Parliament or an MP for the division of Fawkner, and that was at a by-election in 1935. Holt was made a minister without portfolio in 1939, and this was when his mentor Robert Menzies became the Prime Minister. His tenure in the ministry was interrupted by a brief stint in the Australian Army, which ended when he was recalled to Cabinet following the deaths of 3 Cabinet ministers in the 1940 Canberra air disaster, and I will be covering the 1940 Canberra air disaster in a future Disasters Down Under video, so please keep an eye out for that one. I think that would be an interesting case to look at, particularly since it was loosely something that has to do with Harold Holt. The government was defeated in 1941, sending the United Australia Party into opposition, and Harold Holt would then go on to join the new Liberal Party upon its creation in 1945. When the Liberals came to office in 1949, Holt became a senior figure in the new government as Minister for Immigration from 1949 to 1956. He also expanded the post-war immigration scheme and relaxed the White Australia policy for the first time. He was also influential as Minister for Labor and National Service, and that was from 1949 to 1958. And this was where he handled several industrial relations disputes. Holt was elected Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party in 1956, and after the 1958 election replaced Arthur Fadden as Treasurer. He oversaw the creation of the Reserve Bank of Australia and the decimal Australian dollar, but was blamed for a credit crunch that almost cost the coalition the 1961 election. However, the economy soon rebounded and Holt retained his place as Menzies' heir apparent. Holt would go on to become Prime Minister in January of 1966, elected unopposed as Liberal leader following Menzies' retirement. He fought a general election later that year, winning by a landslide victory. The Holt government continued the dismantling of the White Australia policy, amended the Constitution to give the federal government responsibility for Indigenous affairs, and took Australia out of the Sterling era. Holt promoted greater engagement with Asia and the Pacific and made visits to a number of East Asian countries. His government expanded Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War and maintained close ties with the United States under President Lyndon B. Johnson. While visiting the White House, Holt proclaimed that he was all the way with LBJ, a remark which was poorly received at home. Also, as with many politicians, Holt's political career was not without controversy, particularly in the months leading up to his disappearance. Holt's popularity and political standing was damaged by his perceived poor handling of a series of controversies that emerged in 1967. In April, the ABC's new nightly current affairs program, This Day Tonight, ran a story which criticised the government's decision not to reappoint the chair of the ABC board, Sir James Darling. Holt responded rashly, questioning the impartiality of the ABC and implying political bias on the part of journalist Mike Willesee, whose father Don Willesee was an ALP senator and future Whitlam government minister. And his statement drew strong protest from both Willesee and the Australian Journalists Association. And if you guys aren't familiar with the ABC, back then it was one of only a couple of channels that you would have on the television, and the ABC actually stands for Australian Broadcasting Commission. So that's what the ABC was. In May, increasing pressure from the media and within the Liberal Party enforced Holt to announce a parliamentary debate on the question of a second inquiry into the 1964 sinking of the HMAS Voyager, and that was to be held on the 16th of May that year. The debate included the maiden speech by newly elected New South Wales Liberal MP Edwardson John, QC, who used the opportunity to criticise the government's attitude to new evidence about the disaster. An enraged Holt interrupted John's speech in defiance of the parliamentary convention that maiden speeches are to be heard in silence. His blunder embarrassed the government and further undermined Holt's support in the Liberal Party. A few days later, Holt announced a new royal commission into the disaster. In October, the government became embroiled in another embarrassing controversy over the alleged misuse of a VIP aircraft, which came to a head when John Gorton, the government leader in the Senate at that time, tabled documents that showed that Holt had unintentionally misled Parliament in his earlier answers on the matter. Support for his leadership was eroded even further by his refusal to sack the Minister for Air, Peter Hewson, in order to defuse the scandal, fueling criticism from the party that Holt was weak and lacked Menzies' ruthlessness. Much of the blame for the episode with the public service was visited upon Sir John Bunting, Secretary of the Prime Minister's Department, although other figures such as the Deputy Secretary Peter Lawler were able to protect themselves. One of John Gorton's first acts upon becoming Prime Minister in January 1968 was to sideline Bunting by creating a separate department of the Cabinet Office with Bunting as its head and replaced him with Lennox Hewitt. In November 1967, the government suffered a serious setback in the Senate election, winning just 42.8% of the vote against Labor's 45%. The coalition also lost the seats of Corio and Dawson to Labor in by-elections. Alan Reid said that within the party, the reversal was blamed on Holt's mishandling of the VIP plane scandal. Disquiet was growing about his leadership style and his possible health problems. So it was with Holt embroiled in controversy and doubts about his leadership hovering above his head that he would leave Parliament for the end-of-year break in December of 1967 and shortly would disappear without a trace at Cheviot Beach, Portsea, Victoria. Holt loved the ocean, particularly spearfishing, and had holiday homes at Portsea, Victoria, and Bingle Bay, Queensland. On the 17th of September 1967, while Holt was spending the weekend at Portsea, he and 4 companions decided to drive to Point Nepean to watch sailor Alec Rose pass through the Rip, and this is also known as the Heads, and it's a narrow waterway entrance connecting the Bass Strait to the Bay of Port Phillip in southern Victoria. On their way back to Portsea, Holt convinced the group to stop at remote Cheviot Beach for a swim before lunch. He had spearfished there on many previous occasions and had claimed to know this beach like the back of my hand. Because of the rough conditions, only one other person, Alan Stewart, joined Holt in the water. Stewart would keep close to shore, but Holt swam out into deeper water and was seemingly caught up in a rip, eventually disappearing from view. One of the witnesses, Marjorie Gillespie, described it as like a leaf being taken out. So quick and final. Holt's disappearance sparked one of the largest search operations in Australian history, but no trace of his body was ever found. At 10 p.m, on the 18th of December, Governor-General Lord Casey announced he had terminated Holt's commission as Prime Minister based upon his presumed death. The police report, released in early 1968, made no definitive findings about Holt's death, while a further coronial inquest in 2005 returned a verdict of accidental drowning. It is generally accepted that Holt overestimated his swimming ability. Some have alleged that Holt may have also taken his own life, but those close to him rejected that as an uncharacteristic trait of his personality. Conspiracy theories have included suggestions that Holt actually faked his own death, was assassinated by the CIA, or was collected by a submarine so that he could defect to China. I think that'd be the least likely of the theories. The most likely cause of Holt's disappearance, however, seems to be the notorious turbulent conditions at that particular beach. Point Nepean, where Cheviot Beach is located, had long been a restricted area, initially for quarantine and then for defence purposes. At the time, it was used by the Officer Training School of the Australian Army, and Holt had reportedly been issued with a special pass to actually use that beach. A lookout and memorial to Holt overlooked the beach on Cheviot Hill, accessed via a self-guided walk from Point Nepean. However, there remains no beach access, with swimming prohibited for safety reasons. This is like another one of those cases that you see places that you shouldn't go, and somebody went there anyway. And that's kind of the case here with Harold Holt. Because he was the Prime Minister, he could go where he liked. And they gave him a pass to use that beach, and unfortunately it has resulted in his disappearance and perhaps even his death. Surf Lifesaving Australia rates it as extremely hazardous for swimming, noting at high tide the rocks and reefs lie immediately off the beaches, and as the tide drops, strong permanent rifts intensify off rocks and amongst the reefs. A memorial service for Holt was held at St Paul's Cathedral, Melbourne on the 22nd of September and was attended by numerous world leaders. Aged 59 at the time of his death, Holt became the third Australian Prime Minister to die in office, after Joseph Lyons in 1939 and John Curtin in 1945. John McEwen, the leader of the Country Party, was sworn in as caretaker Prime Minister on the 19th of December. The Liberal Party had a leadership election on the 9th of January 1968, in which John Gorton defeated Paul Hasluck, Billy Snedden and Les Bury. Gorton was a member of the Senate and, in line with Constitutional Convention, sought and gained election to the House of Representatives at the by-election caused by Holt's death. Well, supposed death. It was obviously caused by his disappearance. At that time, Holt was survived by his wife Zara and their 3 children. There are also a number of legacies and memorials that have been made in honour of Holt's memory. Harold Holt is commemorated by the Harold Holt Memorial Swimming Centre in the Melbourne suburb of Glen Iris. The complex was under construction at the time of Holt's disappearance, and since he was a local member, it was named in his memory. And the irony of commemorating a man who is presumed to have drowned with a swimming pool has been a source of amusement for many Australians for many, many years. There's a definite irony there, I will agree with that. The swimming pool within the first Australian support compound in South Vietnam was also named for Harold Holt. In 1968, the newly commissioned United States Navy Knox-class destroyer escort, USS Harold E. Holt, was named in his honour. It was launched by Holt's widow, Dame Zara, at the Todd Shipyards in Los Angeles. And this would be on the 3rd of May 1969, and it was the first American warship to bear the name of a foreign leader. In 1969, a plaque commemorating Holt was bolted to the seafloor of Cheviot Beach after a memorial ceremony. It bears the inscription, "In memory of Harold Holt, Prime Minister of Australia, who loved the sea and disappeared hereabouts on the 17th of December 1967. Other memorials include the suburb of Holt, Australian Capital Territory, and the Naval Communications Station, Harold E. Holt, the Division of Holt, an electoral district in the Australian House of Representatives in Victoria, a sundial and a garden in the Fitzroy Gardens of Melbourne, a wing for boarders at Wesley College, Melbourne, and the Harold Holt Fisheries Reserves, 5 protected areas in southern Port Phillip located at Swan Bay, Point Lonsdale, Mud Islands, Point Nepean and Pope's Eye, also known as the Annulus. A memorial stone within the Prime Minister's Garden of Melbourne General Cemetery, as as well was erected in honour of Holt. And by way of a folk memorial, he is recalled in the Australian vernacular expression to do a Harold Holt or do the Harry, rhyming slang for to do a bolt, meaning to disappear suddenly without any explanation. Although this is usually employed in the context of disappearing from a social gathering rather than the case of presumed death. In the Queen's birthday honours of June 1968, Holt's widow Zara was made a Dame Commander at the Order of the British Empire, becoming Dame Zara Holt DBE. She later married for a third time to a Liberal Party colleague of Holt's named Jeff Bate, and she was then known as Dame Zara Bate. And finally, the mineral Holtite is named in his honour as well. It was discovered in Greenbushes, Tinfield, Western Australia, and formally described in 1971. So what do you guys think? Were you around when the news broke of Holt's disappearance, or do you remember perhaps family members speaking of it while you were a child? Feel free to pop any comments, memories, or theories in the comment section below, as I'm always interested to know what you think of the cases I present and what your theories on these might be and your takes. And that brings today's Missing Down Under to a close. I don't think anybody would still be looking for the unfortunate Mr. Holt. I think it's pretty much a cold case, so we don't really have to ask anybody to please call Crime Stoppers if anybody knows where Mr. Holt is. More than likely he would have passed away by now, so it's safe to assume that unfortunately our 17th Prime Minister probably died of drowning in a strong ocean current at the beach that day, which is all very sad. He sounds like he was just a typical Australian politician, you know, just going about his business, doing his work. It sounded like he'd had quite a hard day at the office before he broke up for the summer holidays, and he just wanted to go and unwind at the beach, and unfortunately that cost him his life. I would like to thank all of you so much again for watching, and stay tuned. We have more Oz Files, we have more Real Crime Down Under, we have more Disasters Down Under, and we'll also have more Missing Down Under. And don't forget, our first paranormal videos will be coming soon as we investigate our first location next month with my team at Clarence Valley Paranormal. So with all that being said, I hope you guys had a great week. I hope you guys will have a lovely weekend this weekend. And that's going to do it for today. Much love, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye.